The US
Yes, go ahead, please.
Can you explain the rationale in having the U.S. vote against the UN resolutions that Ukraine proposed and also the U.S. proposed?
I would rather not explain it now, but it's sort of self-evident, I think.
There was a resolution that passed at the United Nations marking the 3 years of the war. And the U.S. did not vote yes. The U.S. voted no. And among the other countries that voted no were North Korea, Russia, Hungary, and Belarus, and the list goes on. And what this resolution said was that Russia invaded Ukraine and also did have language in there that suggested that Russia should leave Ukraine and it should go back to the borders before Russia invaded. This is really amazing that the U.S. is now on record in the United Nations on the side of North Korea and Russia.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Andrea Chalupa, journalist, author, and filmmaker, and the host of the wildly popular Gaslit Nation podcast, one of my new favorites. She's also a student of Ukrainian and Russian history with a very personal connection to that story, which I hope we get into, Andrea. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
Before we dive in, I just want your gut reaction to this new story that's breaking now about the U.S. voting alongside Russia not to condemn Putin's invasion of Ukraine with this UN resolution that has every traditional American ally backing it. And now we're on Russia's side. I mean, it's like we became the bad guy overnight.
Yeah, Trump was always the bad guy. And there's all that reporting that's circulating that had come out, I believe, originally in books by the investigative journalist Craig Unger, House of Trump, House of Putin, and also his most recent book, Compromat, all about how the KGB developed Trump into an asset for decades. And Americans had a hard time believing this because it sounded too much like a spy thriller. But if you study Soviet history, this is how the KGB operates. This is how the KGB maintained a hold on its satellite states behind the Iron Curtain. They would pay off locals who had no scruples, who were corrupt anyway, and they would fill their pockets with cash, let them have power, overseeing the prison systems, being the dictator of the satellite states, in return for staying in Moscow's orbit. It's just a well-worn playbook of Russia's dictatorship. It's always been there. And Trump is just another willing Russian asset because he's a trust fund kid that blew through daddy's money and went bankrupt several times. No credible institution would lend to him. Along come the Russians with all that easy, dirty Russian money. And all my years of reporting on this, I've talked to, for instance, a developer who was very early to the Russian market after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he said, you wouldn't believe how easy it was to get money out of Russia. It was like pouring out of the faucets. So when those oligarchs, during like the shock and awe of the privatization, with all the oligarchs rising up, fighting over what were once government agencies under the Soviet Union, government departments, and they're privatizing everything, grabbing what they could, these guys became billionaires overnight. And they had so much money to throw around. And they're all beholden to the KGB dictatorship, which had the face of Vladimir Putin, but it was still the KGB. They call it the FSB, but it ran the same way. It used terror. It used bribes. It essentially operates like a mafia. And as we all know, if the mafia can't own you, they can't buy you off, they will kill you. So if they couldn't bribe you, they couldn't, put the golden handcuffs on you, you'd get car bombed, you'd have a heart attack, you'd fall out of a window. And so Trump is their guy, and Trump was willingly their guy. So as I've always said on Gaslit Nation, if you want to know where things are headed, if you want to know what Trump is going to do next, look at what the Russians do. And one thing I want to share with your audience, and I don't want to scare anyone, I'm Ukrainian American. I was raised with a very proud Ukrainian spirit, also a very proud American spirit. And Americans were revolutionaries. We had the Revolutionary War. Ukrainians are also revolutionaries. We know a tyrant when we see one, and we know how to fight back. We know how to be resilient. And one thing that Ukrainians have that have served them so well in this moment is that they're not afraid of Russia. They are not afraid of Russia, and they fight back. And so I'm going to share this with my American audience, and I ask you to awaken your inner Ukrainian, awaken your inner revolutionary spirit, and don't be scared about what I'm about to share with you, because it's just being aware. It's just danger mapping. It's just looking at what the potentials could be, what we're up against. And it's this. If you want to know what Trump's going to do next, look at what Russia does. 3 years ago, Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Leading up to that, U.S. intelligence announced that Russia was going to create a false flag event, meaning a terrorist attack, and blame Ukraine for it to create an excuse to launch a full-scale invasion. Because U.S. intelligence announced this, and it was reported widely in the global press, Russia didn't bother with that false flag event, and they invaded anyway. And so I think what we're headed towards, and also I want to note, a false flag event, a Moscow apartment bombing, is what helped Putin consolidate power in the first place. So Russians operate with these false flag events. So if you look at what Pete Hegseth is doing with his purge of the Pentagon, including military lawyers, and if you look at what Kash Patel is doing in removing 1,500 FBI agents from Washington, D.C. and sending them out into the field to fight crime, he's doing this with the excuse of, we're no longer going to really focus on intelligence collection, meaning fighting the Russians, fighting the Chinese and Iran, spies, the foreign spies that are here, trying to weaken us from within. We're going to fight crime. What does that mean? Immigrants? Protesters? And so what you're seeing with this purge and weakening of within, the confusion they're creating of our security services, that is very much the dictator's playbook. And what comes next for the dictator to really ramp things up and consolidate power? A false flag event. So I'm sharing this with you so you get ready for it should it happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could happen. It's very much within the realm of possibility of the new reality, the new normal that we're all stuck in on this timeline. Somewhere there's another timeline where Hillary won in 2016 and James Comey of the FBI didn't go after her. He actually went after the Russians. And so, but we're on this timeline now. So just get ready for anything. And should some shocking event happen and Trump uses it as an excuse to try to consolidate power, ramp up military in the streets or whatever, just get ready for it and just know your rights, exercise your rights, and understand they want you to be afraid. They want you to feel small. But there's far more of us than there are of them. And a lot of those Trump voters who are now taking to social media to yell at him and say, what are you doing? I regret this. They're coming to our side now. So never forget, there's more of us than there are of them, and you are not alone. The whole free world has your back.
Well, that has been an uplifting experience for me personally. I imagine lots of Americans who now consider themselves part of the resistance are feeling it as well. All of these messages from abroad, I'm getting it a lot from my Ukrainian friends saying stay strong in the U.S., which is unbelievably humbling coming from people who are literally fighting for their survival. So, that should give us some encouragement and hope. But I want to go back to this idea of Trump as a Russian asset. I'm conflicted on this. He is certainly helpful to Putin, but I'm not sure that it's because he's been compromised. Maybe he has, but I think his actual sympathies, his entire worldview aligns with Putin's. He admires Putin, regardless of whether or not there's a P tape, right? That's not necessary to buy Trump's support if you're Putin. Trump looks up to Putin. Am I wrong?
Oh, 100%. He wants what Putin has. And if you go back to the Helsinki summit that they did together, where Putin was beaming with pride, just looking so victorious, and Trump was like leaning on Putin in that press conference, like daddy, like, speak for us. And Putin was just blasting America's intelligence community. And I think Trump is someone who was always an outsider insider, meaning he always craved the respect of the elite that saw him as a clown because he was such a character with his big bouffant hair and his like a spoiled baby way of going around the world, grabbing things like a toddler, whatever he wanted. He just came off as just a big weirdo mascot of New York City. New York hated him. And that's, Spy Magazine was just devoted to making fun of Donald Trump. And it wasn't until the Mark Burnett of The Apprentice came along and really made Trump's image into this gold-plated businessman with all this so-called business acumen. But it was all a reality show scripted for the general American public. And what's very odd about that is that there are some reports out there, which people can look up, that Mark Burnett was interested in Putin. This was a time when the Western world was still open to Putin. And he was an interesting character. They saw him as the face of the new Russia. They had hope in him of being different. And, Putin had his shirt off. He was out there being a manly man. And so Mark Burnett put out some feelers to do a reality series on Putin. That didn't work out. But next thing you know, he pivots to Trump. And Trump becomes his big money maker. And that gave Trump the makeover he needed to look like a solid businessman to middle America, to really refurbish his image as somebody trustworthy. When the New York City establishment was like, that guy, he's our pinata. And so Trump is finally getting the popularity of the elites that he craves. So there's a reason why all of those mainstream CEOs, Jeff Bezos of Amazon and the Washington Post, the CEO of Google and Mark Zuckerberg, all those guys were front row at his inauguration, because that is who Trump has wanted respect from for so long. Just like Putin craves the respect of the global stage. In fact, in foreign policy circles, there's an argument by the so-called realists saying we have to deal with Russia, give Putin the respect that he wants. Biden did that by having a press conference with Putin in the spring of 2021. It didn't do anything because Putin, like Trump, is an ego. And for egos, they can never have enough. Their greed is insatiable.
I've heard Republicans, even those really sympathetic to Ukraine, I'm talking about Republicans who have set up shop there to try to support the Ukrainian war effort, say that you just need to talk to Trump differently. Ukrainians need to learn how to flatter Trump better. And it just seems like the epitomization of excuse making and rationalization. And it's on the same path to saying that Ukraine started it, right? It frustrates me to no end. But do you think there's anything to it? Does flattery work as a geopolitical strategy when it comes to dealing with Trump?
It's not reliable. It will work once in one singular moment, and then it wears off. Yeah. And you're desperately grasping to get that sugar high from him again. It's not reliable. It's like you're caught in quicksand if you go that route. The only thing that dictators understand are strength and consequences for their actions. And that's why we needed to have these global sanctions against Putin. We needed to arm Ukraine, give Ukraine everything it needs to liberate Donbass and Crimea. Living under Russian occupation is living in a totalitarian state. The Russians are literally hunting Ukrainians, hunting them using drones, and they think it's funny, like a animal safari. So if there's any deal struck with Ukraine that leaves any of Ukraine under occupation, you're sentencing countless people to death. And that's not a deal. That's mass murder that you're complicit in. And yes, Ukraine can win this war. The problem with the Biden administration is that they made all these promises for defensive aid, but then they slow walked that aid, and they're hand wringing. Like Jake Sullivan was just so nervous and scared about Putin's nuclear threats. Putin's nuclear blackmail worked on Jake Sullivan, and Ukrainian lives were lost and precious time was lost. The reality is the Russians hide their money in the West. They send their kids to school in the West. They put their mistresses up in fancy apartments in the West. They're not going to nuke their fantasy lifestyle in the West. They don't want that. They don't even want to live in Russia themselves. So they would not destroy parts of the world that they love hiding out in and vacationing in, and that their kids are making names for themselves in. So we have safety in that. And so people need to understand that dictators, wannabe dictators like Trump and Putin, only understand strength and they only understand consequences. The good news is that Trump is Putin's last desperate hand to play. If Trump doesn't come through for him, Putin has nothing left. The sanctions have been working. The global isolation has been working. Putin's economy is on the verge of collapse. There's hyperinflation. There's a massive labor shortage from a drain brain that he created by turning Russia into a totalitarian prison. He doesn't have enough bodies for the meat grinder he created with his invasion of Ukraine. He's been trying to poach as much as he can from the poor republics, the non-white, like Asian republics inside Russia. Pretty soon he's going to have to start poaching the relatively well-off college kids in St. Petersburg and Moscow, kidnapping them off the street because he's running out of bodies. He tried to bring in the North Koreans, but the North Koreans got to Russia, discovered porn on the internet, and didn't want to do a damn thing. And so, and they were useless. And so now the North Koreans have disappeared from the battlefield because Ukrainians were so good at destroying them too. And so Putin's absolutely desperate. So his last hand to play is Trump. And so the free world has to unite, show strength, show resolve, and make sure that Trump is not successful in selling out Ukraine to Putin. Because if we can overcome the threats of Trump now here in America, that is not only great news for victory in Ukraine, but for the free world. Because one thing we know from watching Putin all these years, he has depended on wars to come to power and consolidate power. Russia is a failed state under this KGB dictatorship. They don't make anything, right? They had this massive brain drain that's been going on for several years now. They rely on these wars to create these enemies within and without to create confusion and terror to better control people. So without these wars, what are they really left with? They have to do state building. They have to do governing. They have to make people's lives better. They don't want to do that. It's so much easier to be modern day pirates and rape and pillage, right? And that's the path that Republicans under Trump are leading us down. They don't want to govern. It's better to be a meme on stage with a chainsaw and be destructive than actually put your mind to making people's lives better.
When you talk about the free world coming together to resist Putin, do you mean absent the United States? Are we out of that equation?
100%. America is out. We're effectively, in my view, under Russian occupation because Trump idolizes Putin and wants that for himself. And he's going down that path. And the signs are very clearly there. And so what the rest of NATO needs to do, and they can do it because they have the capacity to do this. They just haven't had, they tried to walk a different path. They tried to create interdependency with Russian business to show, they try to bring Russia into the European family. There's even discussion of very early on of Russia joining NATO. And, they tried that for a very long time. There were all sorts of discussions, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, to give Russia some land for peace. Agreements were signed. Nothing worked. And so now we're finally at a Poland, a Poland invasion point, like 1939 Poland.
Moment,
yeah. And that's where we are now. And we've been headed here for a long time. And so the good news is that across Europe, they take care of their people. They invest in their people. I stayed at the home of a Danish businessman, very wealthy, and he was proud about paying taxes. He told me that paying his taxes as a wealthy businessman, he was developing one of Denmark's greatest assets, which is the minds of the people. He was making sure that they were strong and healthy, that they were highly educated, that they could develop their full potential. And to him, that created a strong Denmark. And now Denmark is one of the fiercest defenders of Ukraine today, giving a significant portion of its defense, like all of its defense, to Ukraine for freedom in Ukraine. And so that's what we need to have, that sort of spirit in Ukraine. I have a lot of faith in the Europeans. I have a lot of faith in the Canadians and other countries out there that believe that in democracy, believe in the rule of law, believe that we've tried every route and now the only one left to us is unity and strength. That's it now.
Hey everyone, it's Ken. I've got another amazing writing retreat to share with you. The last one in Archeron, France is full, but another has opened up and it sounds just as incredible. It's in the Italian countryside, not far from Rome, and it's hosted by two award-winning writing coaches, Athena Dixon and Anne Marie Kelly. Just imagine writing in a place like this. Telling stories is what makes us human, and we all have those stories in our pockets about love and loss, joy and grief. Let Anne-Marie and Athena help you lay your stories on the page. You'll gather each morning in an historic Italian village to focus on craft and storytelling. And afternoons will be spent with local artisans passionate about sharing their culture and traditions. This once-in-a-lifetime retreat is for women of all ages and experiences who long to build community, search for answers, and dismantle the roadblocks that stand in your way. Athena and Anne-Marie practice writing as a form of healing, and don't we all need that right now? If you want to write beautiful prose in a beautiful place, join Athena and Anne-Marie at Strada Toscana. No more excuses. This world-class coaching team will help you put your stories on paper in an amazing setting. Join them in Italy this fall. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. Thanks. I'm glad you brought up the Danes, because they have upped their GDP spend on defense even more than the U.S. It's approaching 5%, and they did that overnight when they realized that the U.S. would no longer be there for them. I mean, the prospect of the U.S. being written out of European security is terrifying for a host of other reasons, the nuclear umbrella and everything else. But I want to ask you if you have any hope at all that the people around Trump, in spite of his affinity for Putin, if the old Russia hawks that still can get to him, the Rubios and the Grahams, I don't know, maybe even Hegseth, who used to talk tough, if there's any hope that they can rein in his attraction to Putinism.
I would like to believe so, because it's in their own best interest to do so. Once the Russians have a hold on you, you're theirs. Like, look at the utter lack of independence of Russian oligarchs. One tried to run for president against Putin to create an alternative option in Russia. He was arrested and his entire fortune liquidated. And so that's what happens to you, Republicans. You are on a leash. And if you dare try to step off that leash, they'll kill you. They'll jail you. So it's in Hegseth and Marco Rubio's, Graham's, everyone's best interest to ensure a very strong line between U.S. national interests and Russia. But I don't see that happening. If you look at the decisions they're making, Kash Patel getting rid of all of those FBI agents from Washington, D.C., where we need them to focus on collecting intelligence against foreign enemies. D.C. is a viper's den of that. And he's deliberately moving over 1,000 agents out of D.C. That's what Putin wants. So don't pay attention to what they've said in the past. Pay attention to what they're doing now. Their actions are what we need to listen to. Let's pivot to American domestic politics, because you dropped a quote on Lee McGowan's show, Politics Girl, that has stayed with me. I retweeted it. I've seen it everywhere since then. You said that in an age of cruelty, empathy becomes an act of rebellion. I just love that for the moment we're in, for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it's my reminder that even the Trump voters deserve some grace, especially now when they're in the find out stage, right? If we do the I told you so thing, we're going to keep losing. We're going to keep losing elections. But we have a moment here when they are beginning to realize that the guy they voted for never cared about them, that the scapegoating of immigrants and the whole price of eggs things was all a show. I think we have an opportunity for a transformation of our politics. I completely agree with you. And I understand the temptation people feel, because people are genuinely scared right now and under threat. Lives are at stake now. People are losing family members to the immigration crackdowns. People are losing, trans people can't even walk out of their houses safely anymore. So the list of threats that we're all living under now, the quality of our drinking water, on and on the list goes. And so it is an infuriating time. So there's a lot of anger and fear. And when people are feeling that, they lash out. And these folks that voted MAGA and now are crying on social media, yes, it's like there is this natural human tendency to say like, I'm going to lash out at you because you're destroying my life too. But the reality is they are waking up to gaslighting, which is a very destabilizing experience. And they're going to need a place to go to feel stable. And so, yes, there need to be voices among us. If you do not feel up for that task, then don't say anything at all. But if you feel like you have it inside you to help people see the light, step up and do that. And one thing I firmly believe in is that empathy is the highest form of intelligence. During the interwar period, there are all these debates among intellectuals of, what is the highest form, like what is the way to see the world? What is the highest form of intelligence? And the Holocaust threw that into crisis because what you had were highly educated people serving as Nazi doctors doing inhumane experiments in these death camps. And that put that whole idea of intelligence into crisis. Like, what does it mean to be highly educated? What is true intelligence? And I think history has shown us that true intelligence, the highest form of intelligence, comes from empathy. I truly believe that it's the most advanced countries among us in terms of innovation, in terms of high standards of quality of life, in terms of strong defense, in terms of resilience for economic storms in the world, in terms of COVID. The countries that did the best in the recent years also showed high levels of empathy because they had strong social safety nets. And I'm talking about, of course, the Scandinavian countries. And so I really see that if humanity wants to evolve, we have to move towards understanding empathy as the highest form of intelligence. Empathy is also an act of self-defense. So these MAGA voters thought, I thought Trump was going to kill these other people, not come after me. Well, if you had empathy, you would have protected yourself in this situation. And so that's what we need to lead people to. It's like we need to now exercise our own empathy to lead them towards higher empathy and say, by protecting other people who are vulnerable, you're ultimately protecting yourself. Giving is receiving. Giving is receiving. And that is how we're going to get through these next few years, is carrying each other through this time. There's a saying that I live by: no one gets into heaven alone. Right? There's not a trophy, an individual trophy. It's a group sport. And so we need to now carry each other through this time. It's our empathy that is going to save us.
I think any parent would agree that empathy is something that can be modeled and transferred and taught. Is the opposite true? Is it perishable? Is there a political system or aesthetic that can destroy empathy? Because I feel like we're not as empathetic as we were 20 years ago. And I think you can probably map that progression.
Yeah, social media has played a role because these social media platforms, they financially benefit from getting us to fight each other because that boosts engagement. And then we get like sucked in to that. And suddenly we wake up and America has a loneliness epidemic because we're all busy fighting each other on social media. And so we're in this because we've had Republicans putting America's social safety net under attack decade after decade and stripping that away. And when people feel their resources shrinking, they become more cannibalistic. They start fighting each other over scraps of what's left, and they become more hostile to each other. We're in societies where they feel safe and provided for. They feel the spirit of generosity, where, what's yours is mine. Our shared success guarantees national strength. You want to know how the Danes celebrate birthdays in Denmark? They fly the Danish flag. You go to a birthday party in Denmark, the cake, the party streamers, everything is the Danish flag. And I asked my friends in Copenhagen, I'm like, wow, that's really nationalistic. But they're like, no, we take a sense of pride. It's your birthday and we're going to celebrate you being a wonderful part of our country. And it's an honor to fly our flag. That's the level of patriotism that we need here in America. And the only way we can build it is by understanding that the public good is real. And if you strengthen the public good by strengthening the social safety net, where we live by the value of your success is my success. We're all in this together, something that Republicans have waged a war on for decades, then that is going to bring back this feeling of patriotism, that we're all one country, we're all united, we're all in this together, and we're all supported. I
love that. And I want to end on that note because we go in some very dark places lately on this show, but that's a good high point to end on. Thank you so much, Andrea. We'd love to have you back. Oh, where can people find you?
GaslitNationPod.com. We put out 2 shows a week. And listen, things are going to get dark, but just hold on to yourself, hold on to each other, and believe in the infinite brilliance of your inner light. It's real.
Love it. Thanks, Andrea. Talk soon.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.